24th of July, 2008, I attended a talk by Barack Obama. And that talk has changed my life. Not because of what he said, actually, but because of what happened during the talk. At the time, I was a young doctoral student trying to better understand how charismatic leadership works. I asked myself questions such as, why do charismatic leaders have such great sway over how people think and behave? Why is it that so many of us fall for charismatic leaders and follow them? Now, of course, I had done my research, right? I mean, I had looked into the books, I had read journal papers and so on, and I'd come across one explanation again and again. And that explanation was that charismatic leaders tend to fill us with positive emotions. Yeah? And because we all like to have positive emotions, we tend to stick around these leaders and we tend to stick up for these leaders. The logic here is pretty simple, right? Charismatic leaders bind us because they make us feel good. But when I was at that talk by Barack Obama, I came to realize that this is only half of the story, and that there was another half that still needed to be told. So the speech by Barack Obama took place in Berlin. It was part of his election campaign in 2008. And here you can see a picture of the moment when Barack Obama stepped onto the podium. And because I had arrived 3 hours early, I actually managed to get myself a spot in the first row. So here you can see me. Behind my mobile phone, of course, as everyone these days, is, I took a picture of this memorable moment as he stepped onto the stage to give his speech. And over the course of the afternoon, over 200,000 people actually gathered to listen to Barack Obama. Next to me, you can see Sarah, who was there with her 2 young boys. Because we both arrived 3 hours early, we had a little bit of time to chat. So I learned from Sarah that she was American and that her husband was in the military and that as a family they were stationed in Germany, which is why she came to this speech. And she told me of the painful uncertainty of her family that because her husband was flying missions to Iraq, each time they said goodbye to him, they never knew whether he would actually return. So Barack Obama stepped onto the stage, and everybody was cheering and applauding, as you can see on this picture. But then he raised his voice, thanked everyone, and the speech began.
I come to Berlin as so many of my countrymen have come before. Although tonight I speak to you not as a candidate for president, but as a citizen. A proud citizen of the United States and a fellow citizen of the world.
And so the speech slowly began to unfold its magic. And 200,000 people fell quiet. And I myself, I felt myself getting drawn into this speech, feeling moved and mesmerized about sort of how he told his own story and connected it with the story of Berlin and our common yearning for freedom. And you get that warm feeling of hope somewhere here, and you feel like you're part of something bigger, and you get almost carried away by this emotion. And at that point, I remind myself that I was actually at this speech, that was the reason I was there, for scholarly purposes. I studied charismatic leadership, so I had arrived at the speech. I wanted to analyze this speech, look around, and see what's happening. So as hard as it was, I pulled myself out of the magic, tried to sort of distance myself from these wonderful feelings that was stirred by this charismatic superhero, and looked around. So I began to look over. Sarah was on my left side, so I looked to Sarah, and I thought, what I'll be seeing, what I was expecting, would be lots of positive emotions, right? That's what essentially I'd learned from the books. But the reality was, there were no positive emotions. In fact, Sarah was looking just like this. So I looked at the other direction, and it turns out, most people were like, no positive emotion, really. It's just sort of like, frozen in a way. Now, that's not to say that they didn't feel positive emotions, right? I'm sure everybody was just like I minutes ago, deeply moved and touched by the story. But it wasn't showing up on the face or in the posture or anywhere. It was deep inside. It was not expressed. That also doesn't mean that it was never expressed. I mean, occasionally, Barack Obama gave us permission to cheer and chant. And so people woke up, like, cheer and chant, and yes, we can, and all that stuff at the time, okay? But only to fall back into this sort of zero expression moment shortly after. Right? Now, this was against everything that I had read in the books. What I was seeing and witnessing here was definitely a different story. And my brain began to race, and I thought, you know, maybe there's something in there in here that offers a genuine discovery of the workings of charismatic leadership. Now, the speech eventually came to an end, and Barack Obama stepped from the podium, but rather than walking away, he actually walked towards us, Sarah and me. I was like, oh gosh, you know, this is my prime opportunity to have a real-life interview with a real charismatic leader that I could put even into my dissertation, maybe. But guys, all I got was a handshake, and then on he moved. But Sarah, maybe because she was American and had a vote in the election, got considerably more attention. So Barack Obama actually caringly listened to her story and gave her a hug. And because I was so touched by this moment, I actually took a picture of the two in that moment. So I was just able to hold up that old mobile phone, took a picture. And as you can see, once Barack Obama was providing her with the individual attention, her emotions were actually pouring out. Her emotions were showing. But this moment, as all great moments, eventually passed. And so Sarah and I found ourselves amidst a dissipating crowd. And before our ways parted, I just asked Sarah, so, Sarah, how did you like the speech? And I was just wanting to check whether she actually had felt it. And she was saying, like, it was awesome! I was like, okay, must have been terrific then. It was just great! But you know, the scholar that I am, I tried to specify that a little bit, so I asked, so what were the 3 things that you liked the most? And she was like, oh, I don't know, it was everything, it was just amazing. I was so touched, it was great. I said, is there anything that specifically? No, wonderful, all wonderful. So we said goodbye, and I haven't seen Sarah ever since. But I've learned something from her that afternoon that has fundamentally changed my understanding of charismatic leadership, and that has sparked a decade nearly of research on charismatic leadership. It is true that charismatic leaders instill positive emotions in us. They make us feel great. Excitement, enthusiasm, passion, energy, all that is true. But they also put us in awe. And because we admire them so much, we tend to hold back our emotions in an almost instinctive effort to show our deference to them, to acknowledge their superior status. It reminded me of a quote I had read from the early social psychologist McDougall. Here's the quote. In the case of a person whom we intensely admire, we become shy, like a child in the presence of an adult stranger. We have the impulse to shrink together, to be still, and to avoid attracting his attention. Now, I think this is exactly what happens in the context of charismatic leadership. We are amazed, and yet a bit intimidated. We're full of admiration, and yet a little bit too shy to express it. Right? In one word, if you like, we are awestruck. Right? Awestruck. Full of emotion, and yet unable to express them. Now, it turns out it wasn't just Sarah and the others that afternoon that suffer from this particular phenomenon. In fact, in carefully crafted experiments and studies that we conducted ever since, we've shown again and again that when you confront people with charismatic leaders, their emotional expressivity becomes subdued. And so we've come to call this the awestruck effect of charismatic leaders. They make us full of emotion and yet unable to express them. Now, you may wonder, okay, so, but why do we actually even care about the emotional expressivity of followers, right? Why does it matter? Why is the Awestruck effect important? Well, it turns out that psychologists have shown for many years that when people suppress the expression of their emotion, as they do when they're awestruck, the intensity of the emotion increases inside of them, but they also suffer from a cognitive decrement. And that means that they're less able to understand, memorize, and scrutinize messages. Now, this is exactly what happened to Sarah that afternoon, right? She felt great about the speech, and yet when asked what she remembered, couldn't recall anything, right? Even when asked again, nothing there, right? Obama had stirred her heart, and her head had been busy processing these emotions, but not the message. Now, to illustrate that point a little bit further, let me tell you quickly about a study that we conducted at our business school. We invited a speaker and asked that speaker to give 2 talks. Both talks should have the same content, but one should be delivered in a very charismatic way, making people awestruck, and the other one should just be delivered as a normal talk. And then, after both talks, we asked the members in the audience, so how much do you think you remember? And we recorded their answers. But next, and they didn't know that would come up, we gave them an actual memory test, checking how much they actually remember of the speech. And so we scored that. And then we made an astonishing discovery. The people who had heard the charismatic talk, they thought they would remember a lot. They were very confident. Yes, I remember. It was great. I remember. I take a lot away from this talk. But truth be told, on the actual memory test, they didn't do all that well. In fact, they did relatively poorly, as you can see here. Now contrast that to the people who had attended the normal talk. They actually thought they didn't take much away from the talk. Normal talk, no excitement, and so on. They didn't think that they would take a lot away, but in fact they did. They remembered significantly more than the ones who had attended the charismatic talk. Now what this shows us is that when we attend a charismatic speech, we think we understand, memorize, sort of fully comprehend what the charismatic leader is telling us, but in fact we don't, okay? Now you may wonder, does that have any implications for followership, Now in that study that I just showed you, we gave people an opportunity after the talk to literally follow the speaker to the coffee lounge. Have a cup of coffee, tea together, have a bit of a chat, and so on. Now, it turns out that those who thought that they had taken a lot away from the talk, thus the people mostly in the charismatic condition, were most likely to follow the speaker to the coffee lounge. But that was completely independent of whether they had actually taken anything away. So whether they understood this stuff doesn't matter. Once they felt great about it, once they felt confident they had something taken away, they follow. And that means we follow charismatic leaders, in part because of the Awestruck effect. Now, when I present this stuff, then usually, at some point a hand goes up and someone asks, so, okay, get the second part of the story. Now, the first part with the positive emotions, is that actually right? Weren't there leaders that sort of steered anger, hate, and aggression? And weren't these sometimes charismatic leaders too? Yeah, I think not every charismatic leader has an all-positive emotion as Obama had. But it turns out that all charismatic leaders try to instill their followers with positive emotions. But some still stir anger, hate, fear, all of that stuff. But they do so to target it to an outgroup. Some other people that are to blame for, our bad feelings here. And so they push the emotion away from them, thus relieving their own folks, their own in-group, their own followers from these negative emotions, creating a positive emotion instead. It's us, the great, versus them, the despicable. And inevitably, the next hand goes up and someone asks, so can this actually explain why sometimes people follow charismatic leaders, even if they lead them over the edge of the cliff? I say, sure, if you're all struck, you don't even notice that you're wandering towards the edge of the cliff, right? You're happy on a sinking ship, you're all like, it's all great, and you don't get what's happening in the world. In fact, we did 2 follow-up studies showing people either charismatic leaders or normal leaders, and then checked whether they would cheat by taking away a little bit more money than they were supposed to in the end, or whether they would lie to us. Turns out people in the charismatic, who had been exposed to charismatic leadership, were significantly more likely to cheat and lie after having been exposed to that type of leadership, contrasted to the people who have seen normal leadership. Now, does that mean charismatic leadership is all bad? I've struggled with that question for a long time, and I think it's neither good or bad. What charismatic leadership is a powerful way to influence us. Charismatic leaders want to change the world. They want to convince us of a bold vision. They want to take us along on a new journey. They want to set new moral standards. And to do so, they must, to some degree, moot our skepticism and criticism, make our head draw a blank, and forget our differences, right? And instead, unite under a common cause. And that's what the Awestruck effect can do. It can blind us to counter arguments, and it can make us break with prevailing norms and go for new ones. That can bring about major societal change. It can be, and it often has been, a force for good. But it can also be a force for evil. The Awestruck effect can make us vulnerable to buy into the wrong vision, to be dazzled by seemingly simple yet deeply flawed solutions, and to ignore the moral deficiencies of charismatic leaders who appeal to our heart. And so I think I want to conclude this talk on a piece of advice. And that advice is simply that you need to be aware of this Awestruck effect. Know it and tell it to others. But beware doesn't mean to avoid it altogether. Beware means that you carefully choose the leaders that you follow, that you carefully choose your charismatic leaders. Check their message in cold daylight. Try to see them as the person they are, not as the superhero that they pitch themselves. When Barack Obama stepped down from the podium and gave Sarah individual attention, she saw him as the person he was, and she opened up, her emotions were pouring out. And if you like the person, if you like their message, then give in to the Awestruck effect. It can fill you with amazing emotions, enthusiasm, anger, excitement, not anger, excitement, passion, energy, all the positive stuff that these leaders tend to fill us with. And these emotions can carry you forward. They can allow the charismatic leader to make a change in your life and thus give you the chance to take your part, to play your part in changing this world.